This is the second in a three-part series on audio production for VR and 360 video. I recommend going back and checking out the first video where we talk about pre-production and planning if you haven't already. But with that, let's dive back in with Martin Rieger and talk about production. Hi, Martin.
Hello, Kenneth. How's it going? Now is the real deal with doing the actual production. Looking forward to talking with you about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first question, that separates 360 production from traditional production is it's 360. You're recording from every side. So the obvious question is, where do you hide?
That's not an easy question, actually. It really depends on what are you recording. If you are recording in an open field, you have no way to hide. This is really impossible. Most of the time, people just put a camera somewhere in the middle of the place. Then I put my microphone somewhere there. Everybody presses record and then just runs for it and hopes that we can somehow preview anything. So this is where long distance radio mics are really crucial, that you would hear what's even going on. And like a camera operator usually has some iPad or something where he or she can preview what's going on, and then we hear and can sort of see what's happening, because we are hiding so far away that it's impossible to see what's even happening. So where do we hide? Usually, most of the time, everywhere it's possible, I guess. It's fun. It's back to the childhood memories where you would think about nice places where you would still have transmission. This is the crucial thing. I can't just go into the building next door because I would probably have dropouts. So I always try to be as close to the camera and maybe hide behind something that's not a solid wall, but maybe just, I don't know, a bush or something like that, that would still transmit something.
Yeah. Whenever you're watching other productions, or maybe even productions you've worked on, do you ever see people hiding in the frame? Do you ever watch out for that?
Yeah, I just thought about it. We could do a fun game out of it, and I show you a production, then I can point you where everybody was. But it's just so random. It's always, there is somebody behind the tree, and there's somebody behind the house.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can even see people, which is obviously not ideal, when they were checking if it's still rolling, because sometimes after 5 minutes you're are we still what's happening? But yeah, it really depends on the scenario.
Yeah. So, again, a lot of the obvious comparisons are to traditional productions. When you get on set, what are you handling differently? What do you have to do differently compared to a traditional production?
With a usual production, you have, for example, a sound card, or maybe a bag that you carry with you, where you have all the necessary microphones, like a boom microphone or lavalier microphones, for example. But as I mentioned, with 360 productions, I usually like to record separately at many locations. Reason is the camera is in the middle. I can't use a boom microphone. Obviously, I would be in the frame, and I want to capture the camera perspective. And this is where it makes sense to place a 360 microphone next to a 360 camera. But additionally, you want to have crystal clear voices, and this is where you use different microphones. And for me, the easiest workflow is to use another recorder that I could preview and really focus on what's happening, and just hope that the 360 microphone just runs, because there's nothing you can do anyways. You can just press record, and then that's the recording. And if you realize during the recording, oh, maybe it's getting loud, you can maybe adjust the gain. But for me, this worked better than trying to put everything into one huge sound card, because this is where you would be not mobile. And I really like to be mobile because, as you know, you have to hide. And with a huge setup, you can't really hide. So this is my approach to this. I don't say this is the best approach, but it just worked for me, having two different setups, and sometimes even a third setup where I record wild tracks in the meantime while we are recording in another location, for example.
Yeah.
A topic that people sometimes ask me is binaural monitoring, because obviously you have an Ambisonics microphone and then it records 4 channels, but afterwards you would preview just 2 channels, and like the Zoom products or the sound devices, they do have binaural rendering integrated, so you can just preview how would it sound like if you watch to a certain perspective. But honestly, I think this is sort of overrated. I never really tried that, because when you're recording, it's way more crucial, like, do you have any noise, or like how loud can you be, how far are the actors, and as I said, focus on the lavalier microphones, everything that needs to be isolated, and then this ambisonics part comes in later. Don't be obsessed with it and how binaural it sounds like on set, because you have noise everywhere that you don't want to have, and then you have binaural noise. I don't know if that really helps you, but I mean, it's a nice feature.
Yeah, for sure. Do you find yourself using boom mics at all? Obviously, you know, if you do, that's something that's got to be painted out by VFX. Is that just kind of a no-go, or have you used that before?
I think I used it like once or twice, maybe as a backup, because I knew that the camera was like the actor was very close to the camera and the setting would allow it. Because with lavalier microphones, you have to hide them. Like, this is not hidden, obviously. This is you can see it. So I usually would have to hide it somewhere, I don't know, under the buttons, for example. And this is where you can have rustling. And if you're a good sound guy, you don't have this, but sometimes the clothes just don't allow it, or there's something happening. There's always, I really don't like this hiding microphones under the clothes, but this is what you have to do. Otherwise people would realize, oh, there's a microphone, and you are not immersed anymore because you think about, oh, this is a production, and right. So this is where boom microphones can make sense, but only to a very narrow degree. Still, I always have a boom microphone with me to record wild tracks, because this is great to just on the fly. Maybe there's like a tractor passing by and you can just record the tractor thing, which would enable it for as a isolated mono source, for example, in post-production. So you can just still make it move around later, and it would not be as noisy than, for example, an Ambisonics microphone. So you can still do that.
Yeah, on that subject, you know, recording extra stuff like that, do you find yourself doing a lot of extra recording on set? And, you know, with traditional production, generally you're pretty much exclusively recording dialogue, and maybe, you know, you capture like a wild sound of a door or something. But, you know, with 360, obviously, you know, if there's a car going by behind me, I can look and see that car. So do you find yourself recording more stuff on set?
You always have to consider, like, how long does it take to record this wild track and make everybody from the production wait, because this is what costs money, and you usually don't want to be responsible for overtime and people having to be paid more because you were just wanting to record a boat sound that you would have in a library anyways. So it really depends on how specific the sound is. If it's, yeah, as you say, like a generic car driving by, I think you have plenty of possibilities to add this in post-production. But I had like a production with a tractor where I wasn't sure if I'd have something like that in post. And sometimes it really is crucial, like even how the tractor, for example, is driving. Do you have the right perspective? So this is where I place additional microphones to really be sure that they have everything, even with the correlation of space, because this can really be a problem if you edit clips together. Not only the timing needs to be right, but also like where the sources are placed needs to be right. So that's like an extra step which you don't have to care about when editing mono sounds.
Yeah, and when it comes to ambience, you know, most ambience is added in post-production with traditional productions, and maybe you have some room tone that was recorded on set, but you know, with that extra, you know, typically having an Ambisonics microphone next to the camera, are you relying more on that on-set ambiance and tone?
The problem with this Ambisonics approach is this microphone has everything. It has some sort of voices, it has some sort of ambience, it has some sort of even sound effects if there is a car driving by. So, which is good and bad at the same time. I mean, it can get you going for a decent soundtrack fairly quickly. So you would just need to add or maybe remove sounds. But also you don't have a lot of control. Like there's hardly anything you can change with it. And regarding ambiances, I saw that there are like platforms delivering ambiances captured in Ambisonics, and I think it's very unrealistic that you would find an ambience that would match your scene. It's because imagine like you're recording at a forest, for example, at the border of a forest. So you would have on one side you would hear the forest, and on the other side maybe there's a street. But maybe you have a recording where you are in the forest, so you can't use this ambience, and vice versa. So I think it really gets complicated quickly, especially if you hear. If the ambience is not as diffuse, like you would hear traffic from one side, and then you would look to the side and see ahead, there's no street there. And I think those ambiances would need to be very, very generic that they would work. Like even, yeah, imagine the sea. Obviously, it would match. It would need to match the distance, and like where the water is, and what kind of birds are seen and heard, and whatnot. So I prefer recording them by myself or building them in post-production, I guess.
Gotcha. So kind of taking some more like mono and stereo elements and kind of building them that way.
Exactly.
Gotcha. I'll have to put a link to this because I can't remember who exactly released it, but there was someone pretty recently who released kind of like a diffuse ambience where that was the whole point. They're trying to make it as generic as possible so that you could use that as a layer. But yeah, obviously, you know, if you're recording next to a stream, you're going to hear a stream right there, and that's kind of baked into the recording. So, you know, talking more about Ambisonics, you know, I think kind of the first thing that people think about it is, you know, it's spatial, it records the 3D sound field, but there's other stuff you can do with Ambisonics. You know, you have the capability to, you know, create kind of a mono source out of an Ambisonics mic. Do you find yourself using those types of features of Ambisonics?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Ambisonics and have never really worked with Dolby Atmos, for example, which is like the go-to immersive format. But the reason being is it's just so flexible. I can do whatever I want with it. I can rotate it in like 3 dimensions, which is what you can't do with Dolby Atmos. Everything is focused to the front, for example. There's no sounds from the bottom. Like you can't even place footsteps to the ground. Like footsteps are at ear level, for example. Little fun fact. So this is why I really appreciate Ambisonics being flexible. And you would think that there's not much you can do with an Ambisonics recording, as I just mentioned. But turns out you can even like denoise Ambisonics recording. You can add some EQ. You can add like those tools that you're used to and see if it works. Sometimes you mess up the whole sound field and it just collapses, or it introduces some weird artifacts. But just mess around with it and see what it does. There is this thing called beamforming that you really try to like laser focus some sounds and maybe improve them. But honestly, I feel that this takes too much time, and it's way easier to just place another sound in the field, and then that's the record, and then that's the soundtrack. And trying to focus on something that's somewhere in the recording that already is kind of noisy. I would only use that in the context of maybe of music recordings where you don't want to change it as much and you don't have as much possibilities maybe. So this is where it can make sense, but since I'm a Pro Tools user, there are hardly tools that allow doing that, since they were limited to third order Ambisonics not too long ago. Now it would make sense to really think about that.
Got it. Yeah. And I'll just throw in a teaser for the next video. We'll be looking at post-production, and so we'll kind of unpack some of those tool sets and what that enables you to do. So, you know, again, traditional production, easy comparison, pretty much dialogue on set, a lot of sound effects added in afterwards, ambience added in afterwards, narration, and all of that is almost exclusively, certainly for sound effects, you know, mono sources, maybe stereo. And of course, you can mix mono and stereo sources into Ambisonics or whatever 360 format. But, you know, for whether it be narration, sound effects, does your recording technique change when it's going to immersive?
I think it also depends on the scenario. What I just mentioned is like the basic setting, having something with multi-channel audio, and then having something that is maybe an attached microphone or whatnot. And then depending on what's happening, I choose, oh, does it need to be binaural audio maybe? Is it Ambisonics, right? Or do I have the possibility to work with a bigger array? And the same thing counts for the voice recording. I had a case where we were recording in a very loud factory, so this thing wouldn't even cut it. I had to use like a headset that's like as close as possible to, not into the mouth, but like very close, that would just get rid of most of the noise. So this is one of the things I can tell the production company to do. I mean, you would see it, but as you know, 360 videos are not super crisp, like 4K resolution, and then trying to see like a little microphone, it worked for this case, and the sound was more important here. But yeah, rough answer, it depends on the scenario, I guess.
Yeah. You know, when you're looking at, we talked about this a bit in the last video, you know, adding in some kind of post-production vocals, whether it be a narrator or some kind of voiceover or something. You know, we talked a bit about how you deal with, you know, where do you spatialize something like that. But, you know, how do you deal with like the tone of that, for example? So, you know, a lot of people like that big, boomy sound, you know, versus you have like a more natural sound. Do you find yourself dealing with that any differently? You know, maybe you make it more boomy so that you can tell that it's narration, or maybe you do it less so it sounds more natural. What have you found there?
The good thing about 360 videos is when you have this distinguishing between voiceover and on like a dialogue happening in the scene, you can just do it by making the one thing 3D audio and the other thing mono, so that people would immediately understand what's happening. Usually this is what you cannot do with stereo, so people don't really think about it as a problem, but now you have to rethink how are we even using sound. And one of the things that people do, as you mentioned, working with voiceovers, is having like a very like a large sorry, I'm lacking the words here, but I'm like a narration microphone, you know what I'm talking about, having this proximity effect, that the sound is more present, super dry, for example, and you can still apply this to 360 videos, I guess. But one of the scenarios you're probably talking about is most of the time there's like an interview, for example, in a 360 scene. So the sound would be spatial, and then there's a cut scene, and the person would still be talking. So you would hear something about the scene, but it wouldn't be the on-screen dialogue, right? And this is where when this sound would jump from 360 sound to mono sound, and for me this already cuts it. But if you want and you feel like, oh, this, people would still think, oh, there's like reverb on this narrator, this is where you can try to get rid of it, for example, with like some restoration tools, or maybe add some bass, as you mentioned, to make it more present, so people would really understand, oh, this is now a voiceover, and I don't have to search for a person that's not even there. So also, it depends, I guess. Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, you definitely don't want people, you know, looking for something that they can't see. So, yeah, a kind of a blessing and a curse of 360 audio. Everybody's favorite subject, you know, everybody I talk to loves this idea so much. ADR, dubbing. You know, when you're dealing with those noisy sources, do you rely on that at all?
Honestly, it's so hard to match anything to a 360 video. Like, there are multiple scenarios. I had one scenario like this tractor thing, where we didn't even try to match the English version to the German original, because you would have to lip sync, you would have to also spatially sync, like not even where they're moving, but also the distance. And I remember back then there weren't even any like reverbs that would sound like a reverb from the outside. They were just like plate reverbs at best. So it's really difficult to match that. And I had one occasion where they really did the lip syncing, and it was driving me crazy, honestly, because I always felt like this is not matching because I just knew that it didn't. So for me, it's so important to just capture everything, and this is where you will be safe. But obviously, when having multiple languages, you can't just fly every actor to the scene and do the recording on location. But I would suppose don't try to record everything in the studio. But if you have a scene where that plays outside, maybe do the recording outside. This would help so much to buy you into, oh, this is now the soundtrack and that's believable. But I guess the safer version is, and this is what I ended up with sometimes, is to hear a little bit of the original sound, then doing like this documentary approach of making the sound quieter and then adding the additional language, so you would still hear like the lip, like what was originally spoken, so the brain wouldn't be thinking, okay, this is fake because it's not syncing the lips, for example. So you have the best of both worlds, and I guess that's the most the easiest way and the probably cheapest way to just add another language and doing it that way.
Yeah, for sure. 360 production is a lot less forgiving. You've got a lot more stuff that can go wrong. You've really got to try to nail it from the get-go, which I think goes back to our previous video talking about pre-production. It's so important to make sure that you really nail that, because you may only have one shot at whatever you're recording.
Exactly.
All right, well, this has been a super fun conversation. I guess, is there any kind of last bits of advice you'd like to throw out there for anyone watching?
Of course. I hear most of the discussions are, as mentioned, on the Ambisonics microphone, or like what spatial microphone you use. And now there's the new thing, like talking about higher order Ambisonics. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar. It's basically just adding more channels to have a better resolution. A bit like with cameras now going from 4K, 6K, 8K to have like more resolution to work with, better quality. But for Ambisonics, I'd say the math doesn't really add up, that you would think, oh, now I have, instead of 4 channels, I record 8 channels and then I have twice as much resolution. That's just not how it works, unfortunately. Or even recording 16 channels of audio, which is also what some microphones can do. But then you would have to process all those 16 channels, like creating a lot of data and also creating a lot of unnecessary data that contains noise. And as soon as you have just like one wind noise, it just trashes 16 channels because you can't use the whole file. So for me, first order Ambisonics is still like the best compromise of having like a diffuse sound field. It's not as obvious as with higher Ambisonics, but that's all right, because I end up adding mono sources anyways, which have the best possible resolution. So even working with second order, third order wouldn't really allow me to have this localization, and I would just hate myself in post-production trying to remove, I don't know, bird sounds from 16 channels or whatnot. So yeah, I suppose please don't talk too much about the microphones. Try to get the recordings right, and sometimes mono just does the trick.
Yeah, and of course, as you mentioned before, the biggest thing is just get out there and do it, and that's the best way to figure stuff out. All right, well, thank you, Martin. This has been really wonderful. Again, we'll have one more video looking at post-production, so we'll actually open up a session and look at how to mix everything, but hopefully this has been a really valuable resource to get you through the process of mixing immersive audio with video. But with that, thanks again, Martin, and we'll see you in the next video.
Bye.